Hey scrappers, I want to talk to you today about brass and some of the different categories that make up brass and how to separate and sort your brass to maximize your profit on it. A few of the things right off the top of my head, one of the biggest questions I get is the difference between red brass and yellow brass. If you're a hot scrapper chick, you go into the scrapyard, they're going to separate it out for you. I'm sure you guys have seen that video. You don't need that. The only difference between yellow and red brass is exactly in the title. One's yellow, one's red. The red brass has a little bit more copper in it than your yellow brass, and most of you guys aren't really going to run into red brass. If you only have a pound or two of it, you're going to be better off to mix it in with your yellow brass than to even worry about trying to separate it out and worrying about identifying it. So when it comes to something like that, you can ask when you get to the yards. If you're not sure, keep it separated, and as long as it's separated, they're gonna help you and tell you what you have. But I mean, the bang for the buck, you're talking a few cents a pound different either way, so it's not really a big deal. The main thing is you want to focus on getting any kind of steel or rubber or any other kind of materials off the brass that's going to downgrade the price to an irony or a dirty category, which is the same thing. You're going to hear me say it, and you're going to hear other yards say the same thing. Irony, it sounds like they have steel mixed in with it, and that's what it is, but it can also be rubber, seals, anything like that. So either way, if I say it one way or the other, it doesn't make a difference. It's just going to be an irony or a dirty brass category. Let's go over some of the basic categories and how to tell and what to look for to see if it is brass. As always, the tools you're going to need your file and your magnet. It's going to be a common theme throughout most of these videos because those are going to be your main tools for identifying your materials. These brass statues, you want to scratch these. I don't recommend scratching them on the chest. A lot of times you might be able to find other avenues to sell these, and if it's got a big scratch on the chest, it's going to devalue them. The other thing these statues are made out of is aluminum. That's the main reason you want to scratch them. Look for that brass color in there to make sure. And sometimes you want to scratch them pretty deep to get down through the top layer. Sometimes they're going to have like a brass coating and it's going to have an aluminum base. So you just want to check that and make sure that you don't have aluminum. A lot of your tin like this is either going to be brass or copper. Scratch it, check it. The same thing with the copper. A lot of stuff like this that has this lip on it, it's going to have a piece of steel in here to help keep the structure. Check it with your magnet. If it does, you can cut it with a grinder on both ends, take a pair of pliers, and you can usually pull that steel out pretty fast. Another very common brass item are brass valves. Any of your old faucet valves outside, water lines, stuff like that, it's going to be brass. The handles on there are usually aluminum and steel, so you always want to take your handles off and just check the stuff with a magnet and make sure you get anything off of there that's not brass that you can see. You might have a seal or two on the inside. They're gonna tend to let that stuff slide depending on where you go. Another common one are gonna be old sink parts, elbows, stuff like this. Scratch them. They're gonna have that brass color in there, and that's what you're looking for. Faucet. A lot of your faucet fixtures, it's going to be the same thing as the statues. A lot of the older stuff's brass. Some of the newer stuff's going to be aluminum. That's why it's so important to scratch this stuff and just check it and look for that color. Anything aluminum is going to be white. Brass is going to be yellow. This is some more faucet parts. You just want to scratch it. Find that yellow in there and know what you're working with. A lot of your faucet bases, like the plates that cover the bottom of it, some of these are going to be stainless too. You're going to have to play with it to see if it's aluminum or stainless. If it's not brass, a good rule of thumb on that is if it's stainless, you're not going to be able to bend it very easily. It's going to be a lot harder than aluminum. The aluminum ones you could probably fold up with one hand pretty easy. That's a pretty common way to tell with these. And then shell brass. Any of your shell brass you can recycle. You want to make sure you don't have aluminum casings. And then the main thing you want to watch out for is no live loads. I don't care if it was me hauling it in at a dealer rate or anything. If they find one live load in your shells, they're going to reject the whole load. It's just dangerous for them on their end, and just really make sure you're only bringing in the casings. And then a lot of your copper plumbing, copper fixtures, you're going to have brass on the end. Your fittings are going to be brass. Now you can get away with this in your brass. This piece here is long enough that, I mean, if you got the tools, you're going to want to cut that copper off of your brass, because it's going to add up. You want to save it. You don't ever want to give away this material, because when you bring it into the yard, they're going to chop this stuff and throw it in with their copper. You can leave your copper in with your brass. They're not going to downgrade your brass price, but you're losing out on your money for your copper. Alright, scrappers, here's a few things you want to look out for, like what we talked about earlier, checking it with your magnet. This valve right here, it's got a big steel bolt in the end. You can't really tell just from looking at it because of the corrosion. That's why you want to hit it with your magnet. You can either put this into a vise, unscrew that out. You could actually sell it as irony, which is going to be about half the price of whatever you're getting on your brass if you leave it in. If you don't have the tools you need to do it, it's just something to watch out for. This piece right here, you can see the rubber on the end. It's got a rubber gasket. You want to get that stuff off there. It's going to be the same thing. These two would go together as the irony brass price, and you don't want that, because I mean, you're losing half your money for weight wise. I mean, there's nothing there that's really making up the difference. So don't get lazy on it. Clean it. You're going to make more money. This is another brass valve. This one does have the aluminum top to it. Right there's that aluminum color I told you about. It might come across as steel on the camera, but it's definitely an aluminum top. Usually these right here just have a screw holding them on. The screw is going to be steel too. You pop that screw and that top off, this whole piece is going to go as clean brass. For the amount of money you're going to make on it, it's really not worth the time to pull that little piece of copper off. It's not going to downgrade your brass price. So just leave that on there and just chuck it in with your brass. You really don't want to waste your time with something like that. And then finally, we talked about this a little bit in the copper video, but this piece right here is brass. The fingers that come off are going to be copper. They're soldered. That piece right there, that big square box, is going to be steel. And the easiest way to get that off, I found, is to take a hammer and set this on your table and hit it from the top down, and then flip it over and hit it this way, and that solder is going to break off, and then the steel comes off. If you want to, you can cut your copper fingers off. They're going to go as number 2 because of the solder. Solder really doesn't affect your brass price. I've never sold to a dealer that was worried about solder with your brass, so you really don't have to worry about that like you do with your copper. Alright, that's going to be the basics on brass. If you have any questions, it's going to be easier to hit us up on Facebook with those. I just want to say thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the videos.